We are now live. You are with me here in my office hours, and we have, we now have theme music. This is Dolly Parton, 9 to 5. Here it goes. Tell your friends right now. Share. I mean, we're on live. This is live. You and me, my office hours. And this is a little button up here. Subscribe. We got to get to work. I like this song a lot. But I've got to stop it. Wasn't that great? Dolly Parton. I'll tell you, there is nothing like that music. And later on, we're going to end with that music. And I may even be moved to dance or something like that. How are you? I'm back from New Zealand. I'm sorry I missed last week. I needed to get clear my head from all this Donald Trump stuff that was occupying my head. All right, good news. I want to start with good news. There's too much news that is not good. I want to start with good news. So, the $15 minimum wage. 2 years ago, even 18 months ago, when people were talking about it, I was talking about it. The fight for 15, which is probably the most important wage battle right now around the country. A lot of people were very skeptical. They said, no, you can't possibly get $15. It's just too high. Nobody will do it. Maybe 10, maybe 11, if that's stretching it. Well, the fight for 15 continues to make new ground. California, just a couple of days ago, the governor of California, Jerry Brown, notified legislators, leaders in the legislature that he is now supporting it. Legislature is supporting it. This is just a matter of time. It's going to be $15 an hour minimum wage in the biggest state in the United States. In New York State, there's a lot of movement toward a $15 minimum. A lot of cities already have a $15 minimum. This makes sense. Now, a lot of people say, how can you justify a $15 minimum? They say. Well, I'll tell you how. Because when poor people who are working full-time get a $15 minimum wage, they spend it. Unlike wealthy people who don't spend what they earn. They can't possibly spend, $20 million a year if you're a CEO of a big company. Somebody who is earning $15 an hour is going to be spending it, and spending mostly in the local economy. And that is good for the local economy. There's a multiplier effect. That's a technical economist word. It simply means that spending generates more jobs. And here's something else that is not often known. About a week and a half ago, the head of McDonald's, the CEO of McDonald's, made a speech on Wall Street for Wall Street analysts. McDonald's decided to raise its wage for its lowest wage workers about $1 up to almost $10 an hour. And this guy, the CEO of McDonald's, whose name I don't remember, Steve Easterbrook. Steve, are you there watching? Good going, Steve. Now, you should have done more. You can do more. But you gave this speech on Wall Street to Wall Street analysts who wanted to know what effect did the $1 an hour increase have for McDonald's. And what you said was it actually improved profitability. It reduced turnover. It improved service. You had better and more loyal employees. Now, that proves the second point. I mean, not only are you stimulating the local economy and putting money in the hands of people who are going to need it and use it, but you're also reducing turnover, you're improving performance. So $15 an hour is a no-brainer. And most minimum wage workers now are not teenagers. They are major breadwinners for their families. These families need it. There should be no family in America that has a major breadwinner and working full-time that is still in poverty. It's a moral principle. It's not just an economic principle. All right, the Bernie movement, another uplifting. I got back from New Zealand and I'm full of uplift. Down under. I went from down under to uplift back here in this wonderful hemisphere we live in. Okay, since March 15th, as you know, 6 out of 7 primaries, the last 7 primaries, Bernie has won 6 of them, and not just by small margins, by an average margin of 40%. This is a big deal. When I was in New Zealand, a friend emailed me and said, well, yes, last weekend Bernie did very well, but, said my friend, he can't possibly win. Can't possibly win the nomination. I hear that all the time. You hear it. You listen to the media, the mainstream media, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, even CNN, even MSNBC, you hear people say over and over, the talking heads and the writers and the pundits, they say over and over again, oh, Bernie Sanders, he's doing very well, but he can't possibly win the nomination. When are they going to begin to say this is a true possibility? I mean, the states, Wisconsin is coming up Tuesday. Bernie is doing very well in Wisconsin. I'm not going to make any predictions, but listen, this is... And the other thing that the pundits and the articles and the establishment is not talking about is a very profound and important fact, and that is that Bernie is leading in the fundraising race, even though he's only taking small contributions. This is a huge deal, folks. So, again, without predictions, I just want to say this candidacy is on track. Bernie could win the nomination. Now, why is it that the mainstream media don't want to recognize this? Some people think it's a kind of conspiracy. I don't think it's a conspiracy. The mainstream media they're not, there is not a brain capable of conspiring in the mainstream media. The mainstream media basically are marginalizing and minimizing Bernie because the mainstream media are part of the establishment. I mean, they are the establishment. The establishment is what? It's wealth and power, New York and Washington-based. Those are two bubbles. The mainstream media doesn't get out of that bubble. That mainstream media doesn't understand that Bernie's message is what is actually inspiring the enthusiasm. The mainstream media, in covering politics, only covers personalities. Who's up and who's down. They don't understand how to cover movements. They don't understand how to cover messages that actually move people to action. And here we have not a candidacy that is about Bernie Sanders. Yes, Bernie is the messenger, but this candidacy is about reversing the trend toward concentrated wealth and power in America that is undermining our democracy and unraveling our economy. And people are responding to that because they know it, they feel it. Here's the total so far. 45.1% of the pledged delegates for Bernie. For Hillary, 54.9%. Still a gap, but this is not an insurmountable gap. Which brings us to Mitch McConnell. Now, Mitch McConnell, he is hoisted on his own petard this week. Do you know what hoisted? Anybody out there who understands the origin of the phrase "hoisted on his own petard"? Please let me know, because I've used the phrase. What it means to me essentially is that you are whatever you set out to do. The irony is that you are achieving exactly the opposite. Mitch McConnell did not want to have any kind of movement on the president's nomination. For a nominee for the Supreme Court. So you have a deadlock Supreme Court of 4-4, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats. Nothing is going to happen. And that means that when the court is deadlocked, the lower court's decision stands. And what happened this week is that the lower court, which decided in the Fredericks case that public employee unions could continue to collect dues and fees even from non-union members to support union activities that help the non-union members in terms of collective bargaining. That lower court decision was upheld and stood because the Supreme Court did not have 5 members to counter it, to repeal it. You get it? So Mitch McConnell's decision to drag his feet and not even move on Garland, on Merrick Garland, who is a moderate, who knows, Merrick Garland might have actually voted with the Republicans on something like this. We don't know, but Mitch McConnell basically said, okay, 4-4, we're going to have a tied Supreme Court, so everything the lower courts do now is basically going to be final. Which brings us to the worst of the week. Now, it's hard these weeks to find the worst of the week. It is. I mean, even when I'm back from New Zealand and I'm feeling uplifted, I look at the news, and particularly the news of Donald Trump. And here we have, again, the worst of the week. The Trump, as you probably know, Chris Matthews asked the Trump in an interview, what happens when you make abortion illegal, and what kind of consequences are there going to be for women? And the Trump said, well, there have to be penalties. There have to be, women have to be criminally penalized if they are going to attempt to have an abortion. And then, of course, he backtracked right away because there was such an outcry, even from the so-called pro-life people, because they don't want women criminalized. Who wants women criminalized? I mean, the Trump, his approval ratings, his favorabilities among women, even before he suggested that they be criminalized for seeking an abortion, even before that, his favorabilities were down to 23% among women. I mean, how low can you get in terms of favorability with regard to women? He's aiming for zero favorability. He is aiming. He hasn't said this, but I infer this from his behavior, that Donald Trump would feel it to be successful if he got not a single woman supporting him as a presidential candidate. I mean, he's alienated what? He's alienated Latinos, Latinas, African Americans, people of color, a lot of religious people. He's alienated a lot of people, Muslims, Muslim Americans. Who has he not alienated? Who has he not alienated? And why is he still at the top of the Republican puck? Why? White men. I mean, we knew the Republican Party was the party of white men, and now Donald Trump is going to be proving it. So I got that off my chest, and I'm still in New Zealand. I'm still down under. I'm still enjoying myself. It's so beautiful down there. You know, if you can possibly get there, and you just for a few days. I know it's a long trip. In fact, it's so long that yesterday I left New Zealand. Long before I arrived here. Did I say that right? I arrived here before I left. All right, here are your questions. Lon Kinden, how is it that the officials in Washington, D.C. didn't notice that Bernie Sanders wasn't on the ballot? Well, there's also a question of when did the Bernie Sanders campaign notice that Bernie Sanders was not on the ballot? I mean, I believe it was a technical oversight. I really do. These things sometimes happen. It is correctable. It will be corrected. But let's have the next question. This is from hoisted by his own petard. One of you did green fire. You said it means being speared on your own spear. It's from Shakespeare, from Hamlet, obviously. And Ariel Hartwell, you say it means stabbed with your own sword. Well, it's the same thing. So that's what Mitch McConnell is doing to himself. That's good. All right, Mitch. Keep on being hoisted on your own petard. Cadence Summers, thoughts on the Arizona outrage. Do you think they finally noticed they can't get away with it? And you're talking about the fact that Maricopa County, during the Arizona primary, they limited dramatically the number of polling places. And if that is not voter suppression, I don't know what is. Some people had to wait in line for 4 or 5 hours. Not only is that an outrage, that is actually taking away somebody's constitutional right. Voting is not a privilege. It is a right. And did Arizona get the message? I think Arizona might have got the message, but people's attention span is so narrow that a lot of public officials these days, they do outrageous things that take away people's rights, and then they wait to see if the storm dies down in a week or two. I have been actually in rooms with public officials who have done incredibly dumb things, and there's a PR person there sitting at the desk and says, well, let's wait to see if it blows over. Well, something like this in Arizona, voter suppression, it should not ever blow over. And we're seeing voter suppression disguised in a lot of different ways around the country. I mean, look, the whole gerrymandering of districts is a form of voter suppression. The ID laws that are being put into place around the country are, again, a form of voter suppression. In Alabama, you have an ID law that is so strict, and it's also very difficult to even get a license in many of those areas of Alabama where you have very strict ID laws, and not coincidentally, those are also places where you have a lot of minorities. Next question. Share. Oh, share. Not share as in the singer, but share as in make sure that you alert your friends to the fact that I am doing this live, and you are doing this live, and we are here together live, so that they can participate. Okay, Paulo Lim. Did I pronounce that right, Paulo? Paolo? Do you regret endorsing Barack Obama given what has turned out these past few years? No, I don't regret endorsing Barack Obama because Mitt Romney, I mean, can you imagine what? Paulo, do you think Mitt Romney would have been a better president? I mean, I think Barack Obama, did a reasonable job. I would have, in retrospect, wanted him to be a little bit more aggressive with Republicans, with the recalcitrant Republicans, and instead of leading in negotiations with your final negotiating position, it might be useful, it might have been better to lead with a stronger position. But I think that Barack Obama will go down in history as one of our better presidents. All right, Joshua, please omit my last name. Okay, Joshua, please omit my last name. Why is Hillary Rodham Clinton so reticent and or unwilling to debate Bernie in New York before our primary, the New York primary, on April 19th? Well, look, this is not a new tactic when you have a politician, particularly in a primary, who is leading the other contender. That politician wants to minimize debates, and we've seen this all the entire time in the Democratic primary. And as the New York primary looms, Hillary Clinton feels that she's way out ahead and doesn't want to give Bernie Sanders the opportunity to close the gap. I mean, this is not rocket science, Joshua. Please omit my last name. Next question. Mike Fiddler, how can we extend this energy from the Sanders campaign into a groundswell of support for Democratic candidates running for Congress? Well, this is a very important question, and a lot of people are debating it right now. You've got a groundswell of energy such as we haven't seen in this country. We saw it to some extent in 2008 for Barack Obama, but we've not seen this degree of enthusiasm in terms of packing the stadiums and young people who are as actively engaged. And people say to me, well, why is it that we have, a 74-year-old Jewish, self-described social Democrat or Democratic Socialist from Vermont, originally born in Brooklyn? How can he, somebody like that, who is not the best looking and most charismatic, and I mean, you can't attribute it to the normal political attributes that someone has. It's because of his message, as I said before. And we've got to, regardless of what happens, if Bernie Sanders is not the candidate, and I believe he will be the candidate, the Democrats' candidate, but if he is not the candidate, we've got to make sure that the Democratic Party adopt the same message and commit itself to the same message that Bernie Sanders is committing to. And what is that message? Well, it's not only cleaning up our democracy and also making sure our economy works for everybody. It is a single-payer system, a healthcare system that makes so much more sense than a system based on private for-profit healthcare providers. It's also free public higher education, not all free higher education, free public higher education. It's also a tax on speculative trades on Wall Street. It's also busting up the big Wall Street banks. This makes sense. We need to do it. We need to get big money out of politics as well, which is another one of Bernie Sanders' platforms and tenets. And the Democratic Party, if it doesn't understand why these are important, the Democratic Party doesn't deserve to hold office. Then we're going to have a third party, and that third party will make it, because the groundswell of support for these kinds of measures is so strong. And by the way, if you permit me, it's not just this strong groundswell in the Democratic Party, but a lot of Republicans and a lot of independents are saying the same thing. They're talking about crony capitalism, why we have to end crony capitalism, why we have to get rid of the revolving door between Washington and state capitals and the private sector, why we've got to limit big money in politics, get our democracy back. This is not just a Democratic issue. Renee Husky, did I pronounce it correctly, Renee? Why do certain groups and individuals keep saying that Bernie is being used to destroy the Democratic Party? I don't know. I mean, he's drawing in a lot of people into voting booths. We're seeing record numbers of voters in primaries. We saw it in the state of Washington, in Idaho, in places like Utah. We've not seen this number of voters in Democratic primaries. Well, we saw it in 2008. But Bernie Sanders is actually exceeding the 2008 records in many states. So this is not destroying the Democratic Party. This is strengthening the Democratic Party. And again, I don't know what the Democratic Party stands for if it doesn't stand for helping the poor and the middle class and the working class and overcoming this increasing concentration of wealth and income and political power at the top. Jacob Smith-Seiden, is it time for a new progressive party? Well, Jacob, it is if, in fact, the Democrats are not going to respond to the groundswell of enthusiasm and discontent that is out there. And the Republicans are not going to respond. The Republicans are on their way to electing a Drumpf, a Dummkopf, Drumpf. Next question. Robin Elliott, what is your big announcement regarding the sequel to Inequality for All? I can't tell you yet, but I will tell you next week. Robin, it's going to happen next week. The announcement next week. Just hold. I know you can't sleep. I know it's hard for you to eat, and I sympathize with it. But all I can tell you is you will know next week. Okay, Libby Young. Just how does breaking up the banks happen? Who or what does it take to do this? Please be wonky. Well, Libby, it's very, an invitation to me to be wonky is very dangerous. How much time do you have? Well, I'll be wonky, but I'll be quick. One thing that you could do, the comptroller of the currency, and even the Federal Reserve, has the power to break up the big banks. It could simply do what it's almost on the way to doing now, and that is to raise the reserve requirements, how much capital the big banks have to maintain, so high that the big banks, really, the only way they can survive is to divest themselves and to start breaking up. Or the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department, the Federal Trade Commission, arguably has authority to go after the financial sector. They'd have to do it with and in coordination with the Federal Reserve Board, but that is not impossible to imagine either. Was I quick and wonky? Wonky and quick. All right. Evan Grossi. Could you comment on the consolidation of media power in the United States and whether or not we should be considering breaking up conglomerates the same way as we are breaking up big banks? By the way, Evan, let me just start by saying there is a lot of research now showing that there is really almost unprecedented levels of concentration in major industries right now, where consumers don't have very much choice, where there are extraordinary profits, and the media industry is part of it. We see it also in the portions of technology industry where you have essentially monopolies over particular digital standards and platforms. We see it in the cable industry, another part of the communication industry, where 80% of consumers don't have any choice of which cable provider they are going to have. And if you don't have any choice, that means prices are going to be higher. We see it in airlines. We used to have 12 major airlines 14 years ago. Now we have 4 major airlines. And through many cities, there are maybe 1 or maybe 2 major airlines, which means there's a lot of price coordination, which means consumers are getting bad deals. We could look at pharmaceuticals, another place where there's almost very, very little competition, a lot of price coordination. What all of this means, and you see it also in media power, what all this means is we are paying much too much. It's a redistribution of income upward to these major corporations, to their executives, and also to their major shareholders. Now, media power consolidation is even worse because it means that we don't have that many sources of news. However, you have me and this. And to be serious for a minute, the social media do provide other alternatives. So even though there is a lot of media consolidation going on, and even though it is not good for the country, and I'm not going to apologize for it or be an apologist for it, I do think that people do have alternative means of getting information. Next question. This is from Rudy Sato. How can we help farmers? A lot of people are saying that they'll be negatively affected by an increased minimum wage. Rudy, look, an increased minimum wage, if you just think about whether it's a farmer or a fast food outlet or a service business, an increased minimum wage is most likely going to be passed on to consumers because that increase in the minimum wage is going to affect all the competitors. If you are a farmer, all the other farmers, all your competitors, a family farmer, all your competitors are also going to face a higher minimum wage. Now, as I said before, that higher minimum wage may also be good for you as a small business or as a small farmer because it means less turnover, more employee loyalty. It's not clear that it means higher costs. But if it does mean higher costs, if all of your competitors are facing a higher minimum wage as well, the chances are that you will pass it on to consumers. Also, Rebecca Lynn, what do you say in response to Barney Frank saying that Bernie was ineffective in Congress? Well, actually, I was there. I mean, I was Secretary of Labor through some of these years. I saw how effective Bernie actually was. He was tenacious. He kept on getting changes, amendments, and very large pieces of legislation. His name was often not on those pieces of legislation. He did not have and does not have a huge ego. So he didn't hold out for his name to be highly placed on a piece of legislation. But he did hold out for amendments and for changes that almost in every case, in fact, virtually in every case, helped working people and helped the poor. And I saw it again and again and again. He was an effective legislator, in fact, one of the most effective legislators, because the more you work behind the scenes and don't try to push yourself out there and don't try to get the limelight, the more effective you can be. Which ironically invites the complaint from some people that he was ineffective because he was not in the limelight. He was behind the scenes, enormously effective. Megan Soltis, what do you think of the Politico article arguing that Hillary should pick Al Franken as her vice president as an antidote to Trump and liberal voice? I think Al Franken is great. I love Al Franken. He's a good friend, he's a great legislator, and he's very funny. So I think he would make a great vice president. Jeff Mullis, what do you think of the anti-LGBT law in North Carolina and similar legislation in other southern states? Well, obviously, it's a travesty. I mean, how can you have laws being passed that discriminate against gay people, against lesbians, against people who have different sexual orientations? This is wrong. I mean, it's morally wrong. The fact that it's happening in southern states, I think, is a very sad testament to a kind of a small-mindedness and prejudice that you have in certain of our states that continues and is expressed in a variety of ways. We have one more question, and that is from Diane Diane Bocurier. Did I pronounce that right? For some good news. I'm so glad you ended with good news. For some good news. Can you tell us what you liked about New Zealand, please? I'm sick of Drumpf. Diane, I'm sick of Drumpf. And here's the thing. I got to New Zealand. I was invited down there by the Labour Party to give a talk. The good part about New Zealand is it's gorgeous. People are kind and considerate. And even their Conservative Party. I mean, the Labour Party is better than their Conservative Party, in my mind. I didn't want to be presumptuous when I was down there, so I didn't say, New Zealanders, here's what you ought to do. You can't do that when you're a visitor. But I did talk about various policies that I thought were sensible. But it's a wonderful country. It's a very, it's a small country. There are only 3 million, 3.5 million, 4 million people there. And I got to know every one of them. By first name, on a first name basis. Also, here's a tip, and don't tell anybody this, because if you tell people, then a lot of people will go to where I'm going to suggest they go, and then it gets overcrowded. So just keep this to yourself. There's a place called, everybody goes to Milford Sound. There's another place. It's called Doubtful Sound. Doubtful Sound. That's its name. It's called Doubtful Sound. Because Captain Cook, when he was sailing around there, and some people said we should go down and explore that sound, he said, it's doubtful. It's the most powerful, dramatic, majestic, beautiful place I think I've ever been in my life. And I went kayaking. Kayaking in Doubtful Sound. And the rain was pouring down. It's also very rainy. But kayaking in Doubtful Sound, which is like a fjord, the rain coming down. All I can say is, join us next week for another Office Hours. I want to thank, again, the wonderful assistants I had from Zoe Beck, Zoe Umlaut Beck, and also Yael Bridge, and thank you for tuning in.